My best friend betrayed me for a more profitable project. He thought I would go bankrupt, but he was wrong. I got my revenge on him, and then I've always been meticulous about my finances. Every dollar Olivia and I earned, we saved or invested carefully. For years, we've been working towards a goal: financial independence. It wasn't about getting rich quickly. It was about building something solid, something that would give us security in the future. I'm a data analyst by trade, so everything I do has to make sense in numbers. No rash decisions, no spur-of-the-moment risks. Olivia, on the other hand, is more of a visionary. She runs her own online business, constantly spotting trends and capitalizing on them. But even she agrees that when it comes to big investments, we need to be cautious. After years of watching the market and saving, we were finally ready to make a big move. We'd been considering real estate for a while. Property values tend to appreciate over time, and with the right investment, we could set ourselves up for life. I'd done the research, studied the market trends, and knew where the opportunities lay. We were just waiting for the right moment. That moment came when our friends, Noah and Emma, mentioned a real estate development just outside the city. It was a new project, ambitious in scope, with plans for a sprawling suburban community. The developers were looking for investors, and the potential returns were impressive. It was the kind of opportunity that doesn't come around often. Noah and Emma were in a similar position as us, financially stable but looking for a way to grow their savings. Noah is an engineer, methodical and practical, much like me. Emma, a schoolteacher, is more cautious with money, but together they had the same long-term vision. When Noah brought up the idea of pooling our resources to invest in the project together, it made sense. With our combined capital, we could make a bigger impact and, potentially, see even greater returns. I reviewed the project thoroughly. The numbers were solid, the development was in a prime location, and the market was trending in the right direction. The developers had a good reputation, and everything checked out. Olivia was excited about the prospect, too. She saw the potential in the project immediately, and I could tell she was ready to dive in. I wasn't as quick to jump, but the numbers didn't lie. It was a sound investment. After several meetings with Noah and Emma, we decided to move forward. We met with the developers, reviewed the contract, and laid out the terms of our joint investment. There was one clause that gave me pause. If either party decided to pull out before the project was completed, they could, but it would come with a steep penalty, not just for the person withdrawing, but for the other party as well. It was a way to ensure commitment, but it added an element of risk I wasn't entirely comfortable with. Still, Noah and Emma were confident, and Olivia was eager to get started. I weighed the risks, but in the end, it seemed like the right move. We signed the contract and officially entered into the investment together. For the first few months, everything went smoothly. The project was progressing as expected, and our meetings with the developers were positive. Olivia and I stayed in close contact with Noah and Emma, regularly discussing updates and making decisions as a team. It felt like everything was falling into place. The developers kept us updated on the progress of the construction, and the reports were promising. We all felt confident that we'd made the right choice. Our investment was growing, and while there were always risks in real estate, it seemed like the market was holding steady. I tracked the numbers daily, monitoring the property values in the surrounding area and keeping a close eye on any potential threats to the project's success. So far, so good. But then the market began to shift. At first, it was subtle. Property values in the area dipped slightly, and there were rumors of another development being planned nearby. I didn't panic. Real estate always fluctuates, and I knew that temporary dips weren't a reason to pull out. I kept a close watch on the situation, confident that the market would correct itself. But as the weeks went by, the situation became more concerning. The competing development project was confirmed, just a few miles from ours. It was bigger, backed by a more prominent developer, and it was drawing attention away from our investment. Noah and I started to have more frequent discussions about what to do. He was more alarmed than I was, suggesting that we consider selling off part of our investment to mitigate the risk. I wasn't convinced. Selling in a down market was almost always a losing strategy. I believed we should hold firm and wait for the market to rebound. Olivia agreed with me, and for a while, Noah went along with our plan. But as the market continued to weaken, Noah's concerns grew. He started to talk more seriously about withdrawing altogether, taking the penalty and cutting his losses before things got worse. I disagreed. I knew that if we held out, we could recover. Real estate was a long-term game, and I wasn't ready to throw in the towel because of a temporary setback. The tension between Noah and me started to grow. Every meeting became a debate over what to do next. Olivia and Emma tried to stay out of it, but it was clear that the situation was putting a strain on our friendship. What had started as a shared dream was now becoming a source of stress and frustration. A few weeks after their initial discussion, Olivia and I, along with Noah and Emma, found ourselves sitting in a sleek, modern conference room across from the developers. The project was laid out in front of us, a sprawling suburban community just outside the city. The developers had ambitious plans, promising parks, schools, and shopping centers that would attract young families and professionals looking to move away from the crowded urban environment. It was the type of development that seemed primed for success, especially in a market like ours where housing demand continued to grow. The presentation from the developers was thorough. They showed us blueprints, financial projections, and detailed timelines for each phase of the project. According to their data, the return on investment looked promising, with projections showing steady growth over the next several years. As a data analyst, I appreciated the level of detail. The numbers looked good, and the risk, while present, seemed manageable. I wasn't one to jump into any investment without a solid understanding of the potential gains and pitfalls, and this project checked most of the boxes. Noah, being an engineer, approached the project with the same analytical mindset as I did. He asked questions about the construction schedule, materials, and logistics, while I focused more on the financial aspects, cost overruns, market fluctuations, and projected return rates. Between the two of us, we left no stone unturned. By the end of the day, it seemed clear that this was the right opportunity for us to move forward with. One aspect of the contract, however, gave me pause. There was a specific clause that detailed what would happen if one of the families decided to pull out of the project before completion. According to the agreement, if either party withdrew, it would not only affect their portion of the investment, but would also incur a significant penalty for the other party involved. The penalty was designed to discourage any rash decisions and ensure that all parties remained committed for the long haul. I could understand the reasoning behind it, but it added a layer of risk that wasn't entirely comfortable for me. Despite my hesitation, we moved forward. Both Noah and I signed the contract, formalizing our partnership in the project. The paperwork was done, and just like that, we were in. Our families had officially entered into a joint investment that could potentially secure our financial futures. The developers wasted no time getting started, and for the first few months, things moved smoothly. Every few weeks, we'd meet with the developers to discuss progress, review any updates, and make decisions on minor adjustments that needed to be made. The initial phases of the project progressed according to schedule. The land was cleared, the infrastructure was laid out, and construction began on the first set of homes. Reports from the developers were consistent and positive. The real estate market in the area was still solid, and there were no significant signs of trouble on the horizon. With each update, we felt more confident that our investment was on the right track. As time passed, the meetings between us and the developers became more routine. We reviewed the progress reports, approved the necessary expenses, and discussed any upcoming milestones. I kept a close eye on the market trends, and Olivia and I regularly talked through the numbers, analyzing how our investment was performing. Noah and Emma were equally involved, and we all felt that we had made a good decision by partnering up. However, as with any investment, there are always variables that can't be predicted. The first sign of trouble appeared several months into the project. It started with a dip in property values in the area. At first, it was just a minor shift, but it was enough to raise a red flag. The dip coincided with news of another development being planned just a few miles away from ours. The competing project was larger, backed by a more prominent developer, and had the potential to impact the demand for homes in our area. I immediately began monitoring the situation closely. Market shifts like this weren't uncommon, and I wasn't overly concerned at first. The real estate market tends to fluctuate, and I believed that the initial dip in property values was a temporary blip. I continued to track the numbers, looking for signs that the market would stabilize. However, as the weeks went by, the decline in property values continued. The competing project started to attract attention, and it became clear that it was drawing potential buyers away from our development. During our regular meetings with Noah and Emma, we discussed the situation in detail. We reviewed the market data, examined the reports from the developers, and debated the best course of action. Noah and I had different views on how to proceed. Noah was more concerned about the potential long-term impact of the market shift, while I remained confident that we could ride out the temporary downturn. I believed that selling off a portion of our investment too soon would lock us into a loss, whereas waiting for the market to rebound would allow us to recover any potential losses. The tension between our differing approaches began to grow over time. Noah was increasingly worried that the market would continue to decline, and he suggested that we consider selling off part of our investment to mitigate the risk. I disagreed. From my perspective, selling in a down market was almost always a losing strategy. I believed that we needed to hold our position and wait for the market to correct itself. Olivia and Emma remained supportive, but took a more passive role in the discussions. They left the decision-making to Noah and me, though I could sense that they were both becoming more anxious as the situation unfolded. Every meeting seemed to end with more questions than answers, and the uncertainty surrounding the project began to weigh on all of us. The developers, for their part, continued to assure us that the project was on track. Construction was progressing as planned, and they believed that the market would stabilize by the time the homes were completed. Despite the market fluctuations, the demand for housing in the area was still relatively strong, and they were confident that the project would attract buyers once the first phase was completed. However, their optimism did little to ease the growing concerns. As the months went on, the market continued to fluctuate, and the competing development gained more attention. The once straightforward investment had become more complicated. Noah and I continued to debate the best course of action, but no clear solution presented itself. The clause in the contract that had once seemed like a minor inconvenience now loomed over us as a constant reminder of the risks we had taken. We were locked into the project, and pulling out early would not only mean a significant financial loss for one family, but for both. The weight of that realization hung over every decision we made, and it became clear that our partnership was facing its first real test. The smooth sailing we had enjoyed at the beginning of the project had given way to uncertainty and doubt. While the project continued to move forward, the cracks in our joint investment were beginning to show. As the project moved forward, the disagreements between Noah and me began to surface more frequently. What had started as minor differences in perspective had grown into a series of tense discussions. Noah was becoming increasingly concerned about the ongoing market shifts and the potential financial fallout. His cautious nature drove him to constantly reevaluate the situation, and over time, his concern turned into a desire to mitigate risk, even if it meant pulling out of the project early. On the other hand, I was convinced that our best course of action was to stay the course, believing that patience would eventually lead to a recovery. The market fluctuations continued, and while I kept a close eye on the numbers, I saw them as temporary setbacks. I had faith that the real estate market would stabilize over time, and that the project would ultimately succeed if we held on long enough. I wasn't ready to abandon an investment that had so much potential. To me, real estate was a long-term game, and selling off early would only lock in our losses. Noah, however, saw things differently. He had started to view the situation as increasingly unstable and believed that if we didn't act soon, the losses would become even greater. Tensions between us escalated during our meetings with the developers. Noah began to question the project's timeline more aggressively and raise concerns about potential delays. He also grew more vocal about his fears regarding the competing development, which continued to attract attention and potentially divert buyers away from our project. His anxiety about the situation was palpable, and it became clear that his confidence in the investment was eroding. During one particularly tense meeting, Noah made the suggestion to pull out of the project. His rationale was that taking a smaller loss now would be better than risking a larger one down the line. He argued that the market was heading in the wrong direction, and waiting any longer could sink us further. I disagreed, firmly believing that we needed to stay committed to the investment. Pulling out, in my view, would be a rash decision that would result in unnecessary losses. The clause in our contract meant that exiting early would not only incur penalties for both of our families, but would also lock in a loss that we might otherwise recover from if we were patient. Despite my attempts to convince him, Noah remained resolute in his position. He was unwilling to risk his family's financial future on what he saw as a sinking project. The more we discussed it, the more entrenched our positions became. I remained focused on the long-term potential, while Noah was driven by the immediate risks. In the days following that meeting, the strain between our two families became more apparent. Conversations with Noah and Emma grew shorter and more formal, and there was a noticeable distance forming between us. What had once been a close friendship, built on trust and shared goals, was beginning to unravel under the weight of the investment. Noah and Emma started to pull away, not just in their involvement with the project, but also socially. Meetings that had once been filled with easy conversation now felt tense and awkward, and the growing frustration was evident. The disagreements about the project carried over into other areas of our relationship. Minor discussions about the investment turned into larger, more heated debates. Noah and I were no longer on the same page, and it became increasingly clear that we were heading down different paths. His insistence on exiting the investment clashed with my determination to hold on, and there seemed to be no middle ground. The partnership that had started out with so much promise was now under significant strain. Noah and Emma began to distance themselves from Olivia and me in subtle ways. They started to skip joint meetings or send updates through email instead of discussing things in person. When we did meet, the conversations were curt, and there was a noticeable tension in the air. The friendship that had once felt solid and reliable was fraying. What had begun as a shared financial venture was now driving a wedge between us, and it was becoming harder to separate the investment from the personal relationship we had built over the years. Despite the growing distance, the project continued to move forward. Construction on the homes progressed, though at a slower pace than originally anticipated. The developers reassured us that the delays were minor and that the market would eventually pick up. However, the competing development continued to overshadow ours, and the market remained volatile. The uncertainty weighed heavily on all of us, but while I held on to the belief that things would improve, Noah's focus remained on minimizing the damage. The longer the market remained in flux, the more Noah's frustration grew. He became increasingly disillusioned with the project, and it became clear that he was preparing to make a move to withdraw, regardless of the penalties involved. His mindset shifted from salvaging the investment to simply cutting his losses and getting out before things got worse. He was willing to take the hit, even if it meant jeopardizing the partnership we had built. Over time, the tension between our families became unavoidable. Meetings about the project felt more like confrontations, with Noah and I each entrenched in our respective positions. Olivia and Emma, while not directly involved in the financial decisions, were equally affected by the growing strain. What had once been casual social gatherings between friends had become uncomfortable and stilted. The ease with which we had once interacted was gone, replaced by a lingering sense of frustration and disappointment. As the project dragged on, it became increasingly clear that our joint investment was no longer just a financial issue. It had become a personal one as well. The cracks in our partnership were widening, and the longer we remained divided on how to proceed, the more irreparable the damage became. What had once been a promising venture was now the source of growing conflict, and the friendship that had once seemed so solid was unraveling before my eyes. Following the series of tense meetings, the final decision came abruptly. The disagreement between Noah and me had escalated to a breaking point, and the partnership, once built on trust and shared goals, was irreparably fractured. Noah had been pushing to withdraw from the project for weeks, citing his growing concerns about the market and the potential financial losses. I remained steadfast, convinced that staying in the investment was the only logical course of action, but Noah's patience had run out. After the last meeting, where we could no longer find common ground, Noah and Emma made the decision to officially withdraw from the project. This move triggered the penalty clause in our contract, leaving Olivia and me to deal with the financial consequences. The penalty was substantial, hitting both families hard, but the brunt of the financial strain now rested squarely on our shoulders. Without Noah and Emma's capital, we were left to cover the remaining costs of the investment, which far exceeded what we had initially planned for. The financial impact was immediate. The sudden loss of capital meant that Olivia and I were forced to take out loans to cover the costs of the project. The penalties for early withdrawal were steep, adding to our already growing expenses. The loans we took on came with high interest rates, putting additional pressure on our monthly finances. Our savings, once carefully built up over the years, were rapidly depleted as we struggled to keep up with the mounting costs. The project itself continued, but with our financial resources stretched thin, every new development felt like an added burden. The developers provided regular updates on the construction, but progress was slower than anticipated. The delays, combined with the financial strain, left Olivia and me in a precarious position. We had been optimistic about the returns when we first entered into the investment, but now the future looked uncertain, and the possibility of recouping our losses seemed increasingly remote. Noah and Emma, having withdrawn from the project, moved on with their lives. They paid the penalty for withdrawing early, which, while significant, allowed them to salvage some portion of their initial investment. From the outside, it appeared as though they had made a difficult but ultimately necessary decision to protect their financial future. However, the consequences of their withdrawal were felt deeply on our end. The partnership, which had once been a source of mutual support and shared goals, was now a source of resentment and bitterness. The social fallout from the split was equally damaging. The friendship between our two families, once solid and reliable, was effectively destroyed. Olivia and Emma, who had been close friends for years, found it difficult to maintain their relationship after the events surrounding the investment. Our families no longer met for dinners, vacations, or casual gatherings. Conversations, when they happened at all, were brief and strained. The trust that had once existed between us was shattered, and there seemed to be no way to rebuild it. In the months following the split, Olivia and I worked tirelessly to manage the financial strain. We met with financial advisors, reviewed our options, and did everything we could to stabilize our situation. The loans we had taken out were a constant source of stress, and the uncertainty surrounding the project added to the pressure. The real estate market remained unpredictable, with property values fluctuating and potential buyers hesitant to commit. Despite our best efforts, it became clear that the road ahead would be long and difficult. As the project continued to move forward, the financial burden took its toll. Olivia and I had to make significant adjustments to our lifestyle, cutting back on expenses wherever we could. Vacations were canceled, unnecessary purchases were postponed, and our focus shifted entirely to managing the costs associated with the investment. The situation was far from what we had imagined when we first entered into the partnership. Instead of financial freedom, we were now facing financial strain that threatened to undermine everything we had worked for. Meanwhile, Noah and Emma moved on with their lives, seemingly unaffected by the split. While they had paid the penalty for their early withdrawal, they no longer had to deal with the ongoing challenges of the project. Their decision to exit had allowed them to avoid the long-term consequences that Olivia and I were now dealing with. They had salvaged a portion of their investment, and though the split had undoubtedly caused some financial strain on their end, they appear to have recovered more quickly than we had. The partnership, once built on mutual trust and shared goals, was now a distant memory. The financial strain, coupled with the personal fallout from the split, left Olivia and me feeling isolated. We had once relied on Noah and Emma for support, both financially and personally, but now we were left to face the consequences on our own. The dream of financial independence that had once seemed so achievable now felt like a distant goal, overshadowed by the reality of the situation we found ourselves in. As time went on, we remained committed to seeing the project through, despite the difficulties we faced. The real estate development continued, and while progress was slower than anticipated, there was still hope that the market would eventually recover. Olivia and I held on to the belief that if we could weather the storm, we might still come out on the other side with something to show for our efforts. However, the road ahead was uncertain, and the weight of the financial burden remained a constant presence in our lives. In the end, the split between our two families was not just a financial one, but a personal one as well. The partnership had been irrevocably broken, and the friendship that had once brought us together was now lost. The decision to invest together, which had seemed so promising at the start, had ultimately driven us apart, leaving behind only the financial strain and the lingering sense of betrayal. As the months passed, the financial losses continued to accumulate for Olivia and me. The market conditions remained unfavorable, and the real estate project we had invested in began to stall. What had once seemed like a promising opportunity was now becoming an increasingly burdensome failure. The developers faced delays, and interest in the properties dwindled. We were left struggling with mounting costs, and the loans we had taken out weighed heavily on our finances. There was no sign of the market rebounding, and it became clear that our investment was not going to yield the returns we had once expected. During this time, I began to focus more and more on the circumstances that had led us here. The decision Noah and Emma had made to withdraw from the project continued to linger in my mind. As Olivia and I faced the harsh reality of our financial situation, I couldn't help but think about how things might have been different if they had stayed in. Their departure had forced us to shoulder the full burden of the investment, and I was left with the frustrating reality of dealing with the consequences alone. One day, I received an email from a mutual acquaintance. It contained information that added fuel to the fire of my growing resentment. According to the email, Noah and Emma had invested in a competing real estate project located just a few miles away from ours. This new project had been one of the factors contributing to the downfall of our own investment. The news hit hard. While we were stuck dealing with the financial fallout of a stalled project, Noah and Emma had moved on to another investment, one that had drawn interest away from our original development and was potentially thriving. With this revelation in hand, I saw an opportunity to take action. I began to gather as much information as I could about the rival development that Noah and Emma had invested in. Through online research, market reports, and conversations with people in the real estate industry, I built a detailed picture of the project's vulnerabilities. It became clear that, while it had initially garnered interest, the development was not without its own risks. There were factors such as zoning challenges, potential legal issues, and environmental concerns that had the potential to cause problems for the project. I decided to act on this information and devise a plan that would damage the success of their investment. The first step involved leveraging the knowledge I had gained about the rival project's vulnerabilities. I began to anonymously report zoning violations and potential legal concerns to local authorities. These reports, while not immediately destructive, started to slow down the progress of the development as inspections and legal reviews were initiated. The delays caused by these disruptions added to the growing uncertainty around the project. At the same time, I used my connections within the real estate industry to spread rumors about the instability of the rival development. I reached out to real estate agents, developers, and potential buyers, suggesting that there were underlying issues with the project that would make it a risky investment. These rumors, while unsubstantiated, began to create doubt in the minds of potential buyers and investors. The market responded predictably, with interest in the rival development starting to wane. As I continued my campaign to undermine the rival project, I remained discreet, ensuring that none of the actions could be traced back to me. I took satisfaction in watching as Noah and Emma's new investment faced increasing challenges. The project's progress slowed as the delays mounted, and buyers began to back out due to the uncertainty that surrounded it. The rival development, which had once seemed like a safe bet for Noah and Emma, was now struggling to stay on track. The impact of my actions began to ripple through the market. The developers of the rival project had to contend with legal challenges, regulatory inspections, and a growing sense of doubt among potential buyers. As a result, property values in the area began to drop, further eroding the profitability of the project. Noah and Emma, who had once thought they had escaped the financial strain of our original investment, were now facing their own set of challenges. I continued to watch from the sidelines as the rival project faltered. The delays stretched on, and the development failed to meet its original deadlines. Buyers became more hesitant to commit, and the project's reputation began to suffer. The financial strain on Noah and Emma became apparent as their investment in the rival project started to crumble. What had initially seemed like a fresh start for them was now turning into a costly mistake. As the months wore on, the damage to the rival project became more pronounced. Local media began to report on the delays and legal issues surrounding the development, further fueling the negative perception of the project. Noah and Emma, who had once appeared to have moved on successfully, were now dealing with the same kind of financial pressure that Olivia and I had been facing for so long. Eventually, the rival development reached a point where it could no longer continue as planned. The legal challenges, coupled with the loss of buyer interest and the declining property values, made it financially unviable for the developers to complete the project as originally envisioned. The development was put on hold indefinitely, leaving Noah and Emma's investment in limbo. The financial losses they incurred were substantial, and the project, once a source of hope for them, had become a liability. While Olivia and I continued to deal with our own financial difficulties, the knowledge that Noah and Emma were now facing similar challenges brought a sense of resolution. The rival project had faltered, just as ours had, and the consequences of their decision to invest elsewhere had caught up with them. The damage I had orchestrated had taken its toll, and the satisfaction of seeing their investment fail provided a sense of closure to the betrayal I had felt. In the end, both projects were left in ruin. The financial strain continued to affect all of us, but the rivalry and resentment that had developed between our families left lasting scars. The once close friendship had been replaced by a sense of bitterness and mistrust, and the damage done to our investments mirrored the damage done to our relationships. The pursuit of financial gain had led to mutual destruction, and the fallout from the failed investments left behind nothing but the remnants of what had once been a shared dream.